Jake Morrison had been standing in line for what felt like hours, watching alien after alien pass through the genetic scanners at the Galactic Academy Admissions Center. The line moved slowly, snaking through the massive hall like a multicolored river of beings from across the known galaxy. Some aliens had tentacles. Others had scales or feathers or crystalline bodies that caught the light in beautiful ways. A few didn't even have solid forms, floating in containment fields that hummed softly as they drifted forward. Jake tried not to stare, but it was hard. Even after 20 years of Earth being part of the galactic community, seeing this many different species in one place still took his breath away. Back home in Nevada, the most exotic thing he'd seen was a Centaurian exchange student at his high school. Here, surrounded by hundreds of beings from worlds he'd only read about, Jake felt very small and very human. The genetic scanning process was supposed to be simple and routine. Every prospective student had to go through it before being accepted to the academy. The scanners analyzed your DNA to determine your aptitude for different fields of study, identified any potential health issues, and assessed your genetic compatibility with the various learning environments the academy offered. Most species had specific needs, some required different atmospheric conditions, others needed particular gravity levels, and a few couldn't be in the same room as certain other species without getting sick. Jake had done his research. The scan took about 30 seconds on average. The student would step into the booth, a blue light would sweep over them from head to toe, and then a cheerful chime would sound to indicate completion. The admissions officer would review the results, stamp some forms, and the student would be on their way to the next stage of enrollment. Simple. Quick. Nothing to worry about. Jake watched the alien ahead of him complete their scan without incident. The being looked like a walking tree with bark-like skin and branches instead of arms. The blue light swept over them, the chime sounded, and they moved on. The admissions officer, a four-armed insectoid whose name badge read Clark, gestured for Jake to step forward. "Next, please," Clark said in perfectly accented Standard Galactic. His compound eyes reflected the overhead lights as he typed something on his terminal with two hands while the other two prepared the scanner. Jake stepped up to the booth, trying to look more confident than he felt. The booth was made of some kind of translucent material that glowed faintly. Inside, there was just enough room for him to stand comfortably with his arms at his sides. Sensors lined the walls, tiny dots of technology that would be reading every cell in his body in just a few moments. "Step inside and remain still," Clark instructed, his mandibles clicking slightly as he spoke. "The scan will take approximately 30 seconds. Do not move until you hear the completion signal." Jake nodded and stepped into the booth. The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, and he was suddenly very aware of how quiet it was inside. The sounds of the busy admissions center were muted, leaving him alone with just the hum of the machinery. The scan began immediately. A line of blue light appeared at his feet and began to rise slowly, sweeping up his body like a photocopier scanning a document. Jake held his breath, watching the light climb past his knees, his waist, his chest. It was warm but not uncomfortable, tingling slightly as it passed over his skin. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The light reached his shoulders, then his neck, then his head. Jake waited for the cheerful chime that would signal completion, already thinking about what came next in the enrollment process. He needed to find the housing office, get his dorm assignment, maybe grab some food from one of the campus cafeterias that supposedly served dishes from 50 different worlds. But the chime didn't come. Instead, the blue light froze. It was halfway through scanning his head when it just stopped moving, holding position like someone had pressed pause on a video. Jake's smile faded. That wasn't supposed to happen. He glanced toward the door of the booth, wondering if he should say something or just wait. Then the light changed color. Blue shifted to red in an instant, bathing the inside of the booth in crimson illumination that made Jake's heart start pounding. Red meant something was wrong. Red meant error. Red meant problem. And then the alarm started. Jake nodded and stepped into the booth. The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, and he was suddenly very aware of how quiet it was inside. The sounds of the busy admissions center were muted, leaving him alone with just the hum of the machinery. The scan began immediately. A line of blue light appeared at his feet and began to rise slowly, sweeping up his body like a photocopier scanning a document. Jake held his breath, watching the light climb past his knees, his waist, his chest. It was warm but not uncomfortable, tingling slightly as it passed over his skin. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The light reached his shoulders, then his neck, then his head. Jake waited for the cheerful chime that would signal completion, already thinking about what came next in the enrollment process. He needed to find the housing office, get his dorm assignment, maybe grab some food from one of the campus cafeterias that supposedly served dishes from 50 different worlds. But the chime didn't come. Instead, the blue light froze. It was halfway through scanning his head when it just stopped moving, holding position like someone had pressed pause on a video. Jake's smile faded. That wasn't supposed to happen. He glanced toward the door of the booth, wondering if he should say something or just wait. Then the light changed color. Blue shifted to red in an instant, bathing the inside of the booth in crimson illumination that made Jake's heart start pounding. Red meant something was wrong. Red meant error. Red meant problem. And then the alarms started. They weren't subtle warning beeps. These were full-volume, ear-splitting sirens that made Jake flinch and cover his ears. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the admission center and probably audible for half a mile in every direction. Through the translucent walls of the booth, Jake could see aliens spinning around in surprise, their conversations cutting off mid-sentence as everyone tried to figure out what was happening. The door of the scanner booth remained locked. Jake tried pushing on it, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped inside with red lights swirling around him and alarms screaming loud enough to wake the dead. "Hey!" Jake shouted, banging on the door with his fist. "Something's wrong with your scanner. Let me out." But nobody seemed to be listening to him. Through the booth's walls, Jake could see security officers rushing toward him from every direction. They weren't walking quickly, they were running at full sprint, their weapons drawn and their faces showing levels of alarm that made Jake's stomach drop. What the hell was happening? What had the scanner found? Clark, the admissions officer, was staring at his terminal screen with all four of his hands frozen in mid-motion. His compound eyes were wide, his mandibles hanging open in an expression that Jake couldn't quite read but definitely recognized as shock. Maybe horror. Definitely not the calm, professional demeanor the officer had shown moments before. More security arrived, forming a semicircle around Jake's booth with their weapons, some kind of energy rifles that hummed with barely contained power, all pointed in his general direction. Not directly at him yet, but close enough that the message was clear. Jake raised his hands slowly, pressing them against the translucent walls of the booth. "I don't know what's wrong," he called out, his voice barely audible over the continuing alarms. "The scanner just stopped working. I didn't do anything." One of the security officers, a massive being that looked like it was made of living rock, spoke into a communication device on his wrist. Jake couldn't hear what was being said over the noise, but he caught snippets. Unprecedented reading. Can't be accurate. Contact higher authority immediately. Clark had finally moved, all four of his hands now frantically typing on his terminal. Windows were opening and closing on his screen faster than Jake could track them. The officer was pulling up files, cross-referencing data, checking and rechecking something that clearly didn't make sense to him. Then, on the massive display screen that hung above the admissions center, the screen that was visible to everyone in the huge waiting area, the screen that hundreds of aliens were now staring at with growing confusion and concern, text appeared. It was written in Standard Galactic, the common language that everyone in the galaxy used for official communications. The letters were huge, taking up the entire screen, glowing in angry red that matched the light still pulsing inside Jake's booth. Genetic anomaly detected. Primordial genome markers identified. Protocol Omega initiated. Contact Imperial Authority immediately. Jake read the words 3 times, and they still didn't make any sense to him. Genetic anomaly? Primordial genome? Protocol Omega? What did any of that mean? And why did it require contacting Imperial Authority? The Emperor himself only got involved in matters of galactic security and major diplomatic incidents, not routine student admissions. The waiting area had gone completely silent except for the alarms. Every single alien in the room was staring at either the screen or at Jake, their expressions ranging from shock to fear to something that looked disturbingly like religious awe. Some of the aliens had backed away from his booth, putting distance between themselves and whatever dangerous thing the scanner had apparently found inside him. Jake pressed his face against the translucent wall, trying to catch Clark's attention. "What's happening? What did it find? I'm just human. There's nothing special about my DNA." But Clark wasn't looking at him. The admissions officer was now speaking urgently into his own communication device, his voice high and stressed in a way that suggested this situation was way above his pay grade. More security kept arriving, forming multiple layers of armed guards around Jake's position. Some were setting up what looked like portable barriers, creating a defensive perimeter. Others had scanners and detection equipment, sweeping the area as if they expected an attack at any moment. Within just 5 minutes of the alarm starting, the entire Galactic Academy Admissions Center had gone into full lockdown. Blast doors were sliding closed over the exits. Energy shields were activating around key areas. The hundreds of prospective students who'd been waiting in line were being evacuated through emergency exits by staff who looked barely less panicked than the students themselves. And Jake Morrison, 19-year-old human from Earth who just wanted to study engineering, stood trapped in a scanner booth surrounded by enough firepower to level a small city, all of it pointed at him. The Emperor arrived exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes after the scanner had frozen on Jake. Jake knew the exact time because he'd been staring at the chronometer on the wall, watching every single second tick by while he remained trapped in the booth surrounded by enough weapons to start a small war. 3 hours and 47 minutes of standing in that cramped space with red light pulsing around him. 3 hours of security officers whispering urgently into their communication devices while keeping their weapons trained in his direction. 3 hours of scientists in white coats arriving with equipment Jake didn't recognize, taking readings and measurements through the booth's walls without ever getting close enough to actually talk to him. Nobody had answered his questions. Nobody had explained what was happening. They just kept him locked in there like he was some kind of dangerous specimen that might explode at any moment. Jake's legs were aching from standing so long. His throat was dry. He desperately needed to use the bathroom. And he was starting to get seriously angry about the whole situation. Whatever the scanner had found, whatever this primordial genome thing was, none of this was his fault. He was just a kid from Earth trying to get an education. Then the Emperor arrived, and everything got even stranger. Jake heard the commotion before he saw anything. The scientists and security officers suddenly stood straighter, their conversations cutting off mid-sentence. The energy in the room shifted, becoming electric with tension and what Jake could only describe as fear mixed with respect. People were bowing, stepping back, making way for something important. The doors at the far end of the admissions center, the massive reinforced doors that had been sealed shut since the lockdown began, opened with a deep grinding sound. And through them came a figure that made Jake's breath catch in his throat despite everything he'd already seen today. Emperor Nathan was massive. Not just tall, but massive in every dimension, like someone had taken a normal person and scaled them up by a factor of 3. He stood at least 12 feet high, maybe more, his head nearly brushing the ceiling of the admissions center even though the room had been built to accommodate the tallest species in the galaxy. The Emperor's body was covered in scales that shimmered like liquid silver in the overhead lights. They weren't flat like a fish or snake, each scale seemed to have depth to it, dimension, with patterns swirling beneath the surface like oil on water. The scales caught the light and threw it back in different colors, creating a subtle rainbow effect that moved as Nathan walked. But it was the Emperor's eyes that really got Jake's attention. They were large, taking up a significant portion of his angular face, and they glowed with their own internal light. Not like a flashlight or LED, this was softer, deeper, like looking into pools of liquid starlight. Jake could swear he saw things moving in those eyes, patterns that reminded him of nebulas and distant galaxies photographed by the Hubble telescope. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Nathan moved through the admissions center with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. His retinue followed behind him, more guards in ornate armor, scientists carrying tablets and scanning equipment, and what Jake assumed were advisors or nobles based on their fancy clothing. All of them looked nervous, which did nothing to calm Jake's own anxiety. The Emperor's footsteps were surprisingly quiet for such a large being. He approached Jake's booth directly, waving off the security officers who started to brief him. Nathan wanted to see for himself first. Those cosmic eyes fixed on Jake through the translucent walls of the booth, and Jake felt like he was being examined all the way down to his soul. The Emperor stood there in silence for a long moment, just looking at him, and Jake had no idea what to do. Should he bow? He couldn't really bow trapped in this tiny space. Should he say something? What do you say to an emperor who ruled a quarter of the known galaxy? Finally, Nathan turned to look at the display screens that Clark and the other scientists had been studying. The genetic readout from Jake's scan was still there, showing patterns and sequences that Jake didn't understand but that clearly meant something significant to everyone else. Impossible, Nathan breathed, and his voice was like distant thunder, deep, resonant, making Jake's ribcage vibrate slightly with each word. The Emperor leaned closer to the screens, one massive hand reaching out to scroll through the data. This cannot be accurate. Run the scan again. Verify the results. We have, Your Imperial Majesty, said one of the scientists, a nervous-looking alien with purple skin and too many eyes. 7 times. The results are consistent. The human designated Jake Morrison carries primordial genome markers at 94% purity. Nathan's eyes widened slightly, which Jake took as a sign of surprise from a being who probably didn't surprise easily. 94%? That's higher than any recorded sample in the Imperial archives. The highest known percentage was the Corthan Imperial bloodline at 23%. The scientist nodded, their multiple eyes blinking in sequence. Yes, Your Majesty. This human's genetic code contains markers that match the progenitor template with unprecedented accuracy. The primordial genome hasn't appeared at these levels anywhere in the galaxy for approximately 3 million years. We thought the pure lineage extinct, destroyed in the Great Collapse. Jake had been listening to this conversation with growing confusion and frustration. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He banged on the wall of the booth with his fist, making everyone jump slightly. "Excuse me," Jake shouted, his voice cracking slightly from stress and dehydration. "Can someone please tell me what the hell is going on? What's a primordial genome? Why does everyone keep looking at me like I'm some kind of alien artifact? And can I please get out of this booth before I pass out or wet myself, because I've been in here for almost 4 hours." The Emperor turned those galactic eyes back to Jake, and this time there was something different in his expression. Something that looked like wonder mixed with respect. Nathan made a gesture, and immediately several technicians rushed forward to unlock the booth's door. Fresh air hit Jake's face as the door slid open, and he practically stumbled out, his legs cramping from standing still for so long. 2 guards caught him before he could fall, surprisingly gentle given how heavily armed they were. They helped him to a chair that someone had quickly brought over, and another staff member appeared with a bottle of water that Jake grabbed gratefully. He drank half the bottle in one go, his hands shaking slightly as he lowered it. The Emperor had moved closer, and from this angle, Nathan looked even more imposing. Jake had to crane his neck back to look up at the towering figure. "You asked what is happening," Nathan said, his voice softer now but still carrying that rumbling quality. "I will tell you, Jake Morrison of Earth. But I warn you, the truth will change everything you thought you knew about yourself and your species." Jake took another sip of water, trying to calm his racing heart. "At this point, Your Majesty, I don't think anything could surprise me more than being locked in a booth for 4 hours by an army of armed guards. So please, just tell me." Nathan nodded slowly, then gestured to the screen showing Jake's genetic data. "What are you talking about? I'm human. From Earth. We only joined the galactic community 20 years ago. We're nobody special." The Emperor's expression shifted, and for the first time, Jake saw something like reverence there. It was subtle, a slight widening of those cosmic eyes, a change in posture that suggested deep respect. Coming from a being who ruled billions of subjects across hundreds of worlds, that look was more than a little unsettling. "Nobody special?" Nathan repeated, and there was something almost sad in his voice. "Young human, your species carries genetic markers from the progenitors, the first race who seeded life across this entire galactic cluster millions of years ago. Every species in this room, every civilization in the known galaxy, we are all descended from them. The progenitors created us, shaped us, gave us the gift of intelligence and consciousness." Jake's mind was reeling. He'd heard of the progenitors, of course. They were part of galactic mythology, ancient beings that were supposed to have existed before recorded history. Most scientists treated them like Earth's own ancient astronaut theories, interesting stories but probably not real. "But the progenitors are myths," Jake protested weakly. They're like our legends of Atlantis or ancient aliens. Nobody actually believes they existed." "They existed," Nathan said firmly. "And their pure genetic code was thought lost forever, diluted through millions of years of evolution and mixing a species spread across the galaxy and interbred and changed. Every generation, the original progenitor markers became weaker, more fragmented, buried under layers of evolutionary adaptation." The Emperor turned back to the genetic readouts, pointing at specific sequences that glowed on the screen. "My own species, the Corthan, carry approximately 23% progenitor markers. We have the highest percentage of any known civilization, which is why my ancestors became the imperial line. That 23% gives us longer lifespans, enhanced mental capabilities, and certain other advantages over species with lower percentages." "And me?" Jake asked, though he was starting to suspect the answer. "You," Nathan said, fixing those cosmic eyes on him again, "carry 94% pure progenitor genetic code. You are essentially a living progenitor, more connected to the first race than any being who has lived in 3 million years. Do you understand what this means?" Jake didn't. Not really. But looking at the faces around him, the scientists staring at him with awe, the guards watching him with a mixture of fear and respect, the Emperor himself treating him like he was something precious and powerful, Jake was starting to realize that his simple plan to study engineering at the Galactic Academy had just become impossibly complicated. The news spread faster than Jake could have imagined possible. Within 24 hours of Emperor Nathan's arrival at the Academy, every major news network in the galaxy was running the story. "Human student carries ancient progenitor DNA," screamed the headlines. "Living fossil discovered at Galactic Academy," read another. "The last true progenitor walks among us," claimed a third, which Jake thought was a bit dramatic but apparently captured how everyone else felt about the situation. His face was everywhere. Someone had leaked security footage from the admissions center, showing the moment the scanner froze and the alarms started blaring. That clip had been viewed over 3 billion times in the first day alone. Jake's student ID photo had been pulled from the Academy database and was now plastered across every news feed and social media platform in known space. He'd become the most famous person in the galaxy overnight, and he absolutely hated it. Within 3 days, the situation at the Academy had become completely untenable. Representatives from dozens of civilizations had descended on the campus, all demanding to see Jake, to study him, to verify the results themselves. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Religious groups from 7 different species declared him either a prophet or a demon, depending on their particular theology. Scientists were fighting each other for the chance to analyze his DNA. And the media circus outside the Academy gates had grown so large that normal classes had been suspended. But it was the death threats that finally convinced everyone Jake needed to be moved somewhere more secure. They started coming in almost immediately. Encrypted messages, anonymous communications, threats left on public forums. Most were vague, generic warnings that Jake represented a danger to the natural order and needed to be eliminated. Others were disturbingly specific, detailing exactly how they planned to kill him and what they would do with his body afterward. A few even offered rewards for anyone who could capture Jake alive and deliver him to certain parties who had important research to conduct. Emperor Nathan made the decision personally. Jake would be moved to the Imperial Palace, the most secure location in the galaxy, until they could figure out what to do about this situation. Jake didn't argue. After reading the 15th death threat describing in detail how someone planned to harvest his organs, he was more than ready to go somewhere with really good security. The Imperial Palace was located on the Corthan homeworld, a planet called the Ruz that orbited a binary star system in the galactic core. The journey took 2 days via the fastest Imperial transport ship, and Jake spent most of that time in a luxurious cabin that was bigger than his family's entire apartment back on Earth, trying to process everything that had happened. He'd called his parents, of course. That conversation had been surreal. His mom had cried. His dad had made jokes to cover up how worried he was. His little sister had thought it was cool that her brother was famous, at least until Jake explained the part about the death threats. They'd wanted him to come home immediately, to forget about the Academy and just hide on Earth where it was safe. But Emperor Nathan had explained that nowhere would be truly safe now. The knowledge was out. The galaxy knew that humans carried exceptionally pure progenitor DNA, and that particular cat was never going back in the bag. The only way forward was to face the situation head-on, to figure out what it all meant and how to protect not just Jake but all of humanity from the various factions who might want to exploit this discovery. The Imperial Palace was beyond anything Jake had seen before, and he'd thought the Galactic Academy was impressive. The complex sprawled across an entire mountainside, with towers and spires that reached into the clouds. The architecture was a mix of ancient and modern, with structures that had stood for thousands of years alongside buildings that incorporated the latest technology. Gardens filled with plants from hundreds of worlds terraced down the slopes, and the whole thing was protected by defense systems that could probably withstand a direct assault from a military fleet. Jake was given an entire suite of rooms in one of the guest wings. The bedroom alone was 3 times the size of his dorm room would have been at the Academy. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the gardens and the sprawling capital city beyond. There was a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, a sitting room with furniture that adjusted itself to perfectly fit his body, and technology that responded to his voice commands before he'd even finished speaking them. It was incredible. It was also lonely and more than a little frightening. On his second day at the palace, Emperor Nathan came to visit him personally. The massive Corthan had to duck slightly to fit through the doorway, and his presence seemed to fill the entire sitting room. But his manner was gentle as he settled into a chair that had been specially reinforced to handle his weight. "How are you adjusting?" Nathan asked, those cosmic eyes studying Jake with concern. "I'm okay, I guess," Jake said, though that was a lie and they both knew it. "It's just a lot to process. A week ago, I was worried about whether I'd packed enough socks for the semester. Now I'm hiding in a palace because half the galaxy wants to either worship me or kill me. Nathan nodded slowly. I understand this is overwhelming. But there is something you need to know, something that might help you understand that you are not alone in this situation. He gestured, and a door Jake hadn't noticed before slid open. Through it came 3 people, and Jake's heart jumped when he realized they were human. Not just any humans, but people who looked as confused and overwhelmed as he felt. Jake Morrison, Nathan said formally, I would like you to meet Rachel Torres, Michael Park, and Jennifer Walsh. They are also human, and they also carry high levels of progenitor markers in their DNA. Jake stood up quickly, shaking hands with each of them. Rachel was maybe 30, with dark hair and the kind of nervous energy that suggested she'd had way too much coffee. Michael looked to be in his 40s, tall and athletic with graying temples. Jennifer was younger, probably mid-20s, with bright red hair and freckles that reminded Jake of his cousin back home. You've been tested too? Jake asked. We've all been tested, Rachel said, settling into one of the chairs. The Empire has been quietly running genetic scans on humans for the past 5 years, ever since your species joined the galactic community. They wanted to understand why human biology seemed compatible with so many other species. Why you could eat our food, breathe our air, survive in our environments better than species who'd been in the galaxy for thousands of years. And what they found, Michael continued, his voice carrying a slight accent Jake couldn't place, is that all humans carry exceptionally high levels of progenitor genetic markers. Not just a few special individuals, all of you. Every single human who's been tested. Nathan leaned forward slightly. The average human carries approximately 65% pure progenitor DNA. To put that in perspective, the next highest species averages around 18%. You are all essentially living repositories of the ancient genetic code that created all intelligent life in this galaxy. Jake's mind was spinning. All humans? Everyone on Earth? Everyone we've tested so far, yes, Jennifer said. She had a tablet in her hands and was pulling up data as she spoke. I'm a geneticist, was a geneticist, before all this happened, and I've been helping analyze the results. The consistency is remarkable. There's variation, of course. Some individuals have higher percentages than others. But the human baseline is far, far higher than any other known species. Your 94% is exceptional, Nathan added. That's the highest we've found so far. Rachel here carries 71%. Michael is at 68%. Jennifer is at 73%. These are still extraordinary numbers, but you, Jake Morrison, appear to be the closest thing to a pure progenitor that has existed in millions of years. Why? Jake asked, the question that had been haunting him since this all began. Why do humans have such high percentages? What makes us special? Rachel exchanged glances with the others before answering. The best theory we have is isolation. Earth was seeded by the progenitors just like every other world with intelligent life. But then something happened, we don't know what exactly. Your planet was cut off from the rest of the galaxy, quarantined somehow. For millions of years, humanity evolved in complete isolation. While other species were spreading across the stars, meeting each other, interbreeding, mixing their genetic codes and diluting the original progenitor markers, Michael explained, humans stayed on Earth. You evolved alone, with no outside genetic influence. The progenitor code in your DNA remained pure, undiluted, passed down generation after generation without contamination from other species. You were protected, Nathan said quietly. Whether by accident or design, your world was kept separate until the time was right. And now, after 3 million years, the pure progenitor lineage has re-emerged. Not in some carefully bred imperial line or preserved genetic sample, but in an entire species. 7 billion humans, all carrying the ancient code. The weight of that realization settled over Jake like a physical thing. It wasn't just him. It was everyone he knew, everyone he'd grown up with, everyone on Earth. His parents, his sister, his friends, his teachers, all of them carried this ancient legacy. Humanity wasn't just another species joining the galactic community. They were something else entirely, something that hadn't existed in the known universe for longer than recorded history. So what happens now? Jake asked quietly. To me, to Earth, to all of us. The room fell silent. Nathan's expression was troubled, and the other humans looked equally uncertain. Finally, it was Jennifer who spoke, her voice gentle but honest. That's what we're trying to figure out, Jake. Because what you need to understand is that the progenitors didn't just seed life randomly across the galaxy. They were building towards something, preparing for something. And there are people out there, factions, cults, entire civilizations, who've been searching for pure progenitor carriers for thousands of years. Some want to study you, Rachel added. To understand what makes the progenitor DNA special. Some want to use you, Michael said grimly. To harvest your genetic material and try to enhance their own species. And some, Nathan finished, his cosmic eyes darkening, want to destroy you. Because they fear what the return of the progenitor lineage might mean for the established order of the galaxy. After 3 weeks of intensive security briefings and genetic testing at the Imperial Palace, Emperor Nathan made a surprising decision. Jake would return to the Galactic Academy and continue his studies. The Emperor believed that hiding Jake away would only make the situation worse, would make him look weak and vulnerable. Better to show strength, to demonstrate that humanity wouldn't be intimidated by threats or cowed by fear. Jake wasn't sure he agreed with that logic, but he also desperately wanted some semblance of normal life back. So he found himself returning to the Academy campus, though normal was definitely not the word for what his life had become. His first day back, Jake walked into Introduction to Astrophysics surrounded by 6 heavily armed guards. They weren't subtle about it either. They positioned themselves at strategic points around the lecture hall, their weapons visible, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. The other students stared, whispered, took pictures with their communication devices. Jake tried to ignore them and focus on the professor's lecture about gravitational waves, but it was impossible to concentrate with everyone watching him. The professor, a floating jellyfish-like being named Dr. Rivers, seemed almost as nervous as Jake felt. He kept glancing at Jake during the lecture, stumbling over his words, clearly unsure how to treat a student who was simultaneously a 19-year-old kid and apparently the most genetically important person in the galaxy. But Jake was determined to at least try to have a normal college experience. He took notes. He asked questions. He even made a few attempts at jokes that fell flat because nobody seemed to know if they were allowed to laugh at someone with 94% progenitor DNA. The weirdness extended to every part of campus life. In the cafeteria, students would stop eating and stare when he walked past. Some approached him reverently, asking for autographs or pictures or just to touch his hand like he was some kind of religious figure. Others avoided him completely, changing direction when they saw him coming, as if proximity to a high progenitor carrier might be dangerous. The Academy had also started running tests on Jake, with his permission and under strict medical supervision. They wanted to understand what having such pure progenitor DNA actually meant in practical terms. What could Jake do that others couldn't? What abilities did the ancient genetic code unlock? The results were fascinating and more than a little unsettling. The first thing they discovered was that Jake could see things other people couldn't. During a routine vision test, the optometrist noticed that Jake was describing patterns in what should have been blank screens. When they investigated further, they realized Jake was perceiving energy patterns, electromagnetic fields, radiation, even the subtle bioelectric auras that all living things generated. It's like having a whole new sense, Jake tried to explain to Dr. Rebecca, the crystalline scientist who'd been studying his genome since the beginning. I can see the electricity flowing through the walls, the heat signatures of people in the next room, even the communication signals bouncing between devices. It's all just there, visible, like colored light overlaying normal vision. Dr. Rebecca's crystalline form sparkled with excitement. The progenitors could perceive energy directly. Most modern species lost that ability as we evolved, but your DNA still carries the genetic instructions for it. Your brain is literally processing information that most beings can't even detect. The healing was even more dramatic. During one test, a medical technician accidentally cut Jake's arm with a piece of equipment. It wasn't a deep cut, but it was enough to require stitches normally. The medical staff rushed to treat it, but by the time they gathered the supplies, the wound had already stopped bleeding. Within 10 minutes, it had closed completely. Within an hour, there wasn't even a scar. Your cellular regeneration rate is approximately 15 times faster than baseline human, the doctor explained, scanning the healed area with instruments that beeped and hummed. Your immune system is so efficient it's eliminating damaged cells and replacing them almost as fast as injury occurs. A broken bone would heal in days instead of weeks. A serious illness would be fought off in hours. Then there were the mental abilities. Jake had always been decent at math, but nothing special. Now he found himself solving complex equations in his head faster than he could type them into a calculator. During a xenolinguistics class, he picked up the basics of a new alien language in a single session, something that normally took students weeks. The Academy's AI systems ran cognitive tests on Jake and found his processing speed was operating at levels they'd never seen in an organic brain. He could hold multiple complex thoughts simultaneously, make intuitive leaps of logic that took others hours of careful reasoning, and absorb new information at rates that seemed impossible. These aren't superpowers, Dr. Rebecca emphasized during one of their research sessions. This is just what the progenitor baseline was capable of. Your DNA is telling your body and brain to function at the level they were originally designed for. Other species have lost these capabilities over millions of years of evolution, but you still have them. You're not enhanced, everyone else is diminished. That perspective was both empowering and isolating. Jake was different, fundamentally different, in ways that went beyond just genetics. And not everyone was happy about it. The first assassination attempt came 3 weeks into the semester, during that same astrophysics class where Jake had first returned to normal student life. Dr. Rivers was in the middle of explaining something about black hole event horizons when Jake felt something wrong. That new energy sensing ability he developed suddenly screamed danger. He could see the electromagnetic signature of a weapon powering up somewhere to his left, could perceive the surge of energy that meant something bad was about to happen. Jake's head snapped around just as a student 5 rows back stood up. The alien was from a species called the Collective, humanoid but with gray skin and large black eyes. Jake had seen them around campus before. They were known for being quiet, studious, generally peaceful. This one was named Paul according to his student ID. Paul was pointing something at Jake, a small device that hummed with barely contained energy. A molecular disruptor, Jake's brain supplied helpfully, one of the most banned weapons in the galaxy because of how horrifically effective it was. Time seemed to slow down. Jake saw Paul's finger tighten on the trigger. Saw the weapon's energy signature spike as it prepared to fire. Saw his guard starting to react, but they were too far away, too slow, they would never reach Paul in time. The molecular disruptor fired. The weapon emitted an invisible beam of energy designed to disrupt molecular bonds, to literally tear matter apart at the atomic level. A hit to the head would turn a brain into soup instantly. There was no defense against it, no way to survive it. Paul had positioned himself perfectly, had waited for the exact moment when Jake's guards were focused elsewhere. It should have been a perfect kill shot. But something impossible happened. Jake's hand moved. He didn't consciously decide to move it, his body reacted before his brain could process what was happening, driven by reflexes coded into his progenitor DNA. His hand shot up impossibly fast, faster than human reflexes should allow, and caught the beam of energy in his palm. The molecular disruptor's beam hit Jake's outstretched hand and simply stopped. The energy that should have torn through his flesh and bone instead dissipated harmlessly, absorbed or deflected by something Jake didn't understand. He could feel the weapon's power washing over his skin like water, uncomfortable but not painful, certainly not lethal. The entire lecture hall had gone silent. Everyone was frozen, staring at Jake's outstretched hand, at the molecular disruptor still firing uselessly at him, at Paul's expression of absolute shock and disbelief. Jake stared at his own palm, equally shocked. There was a faint glow visible on his skin where the beam was hitting, a shimmer of energy that looked almost like a force field. But he wasn't wearing any protective gear. This was coming from him, from his own body somehow. The guards finally reached Paul and tackled him to the ground, forcing his hand away so the molecular disruptor fired harmlessly into the ceiling. The weapon carved a hole straight through 3 feet of reinforced material before Paul's finger left the trigger. Jake slowly lowered his hand, turning it over to examine his palm. There wasn't a mark on it. Not a burn, not a scratch, nothing. He'd just caught a beam of energy that could disintegrate solid matter, and his hand was completely fine. Dr. Rebecca would later explain that Jake's body had instinctively generated a localized energy field to protect himself, drawing on reserves of bioelectric power that most species didn't have access to anymore. The progenitors could manipulate energy directly, and Jake's DNA still remembered how. But in that moment, standing in the lecture hall with everyone staring at him in shock and fear and awe, Jake realized something terrible. He wasn't just different from other students. He was so far beyond them that normal weapons couldn't even hurt him. And that wasn't going to make people less afraid of him, it was going to make everything so much worse. Paul was dragged away by security, screaming about abominations and how Jake represented a threat to the natural order. The class was dismissed. Jake's guards surrounded him protectively, though it was now clear he might not actually need their protection. That night, lying in his heavily secured dorm room, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, kept staring at his hand and wondering what else he was capable of. What other abilities were hidden in his DNA, waiting to emerge? How much more different from everyone else was he going to become? The assassination attempts continued after that. Poison in his food that his immune system neutralized before it could reach his bloodstream. A virus engineered specifically to attack progenitor genetic markers that his body simply absorbed and broke down. An elaborate trap using ancient progenitor technology that somehow recognized Jake as an authorized user and shut down instead of activating. Each failed attempt made Jake more isolated, more obviously different. Students who'd been friendly before started avoiding him. Even some of his guards looked at him with barely concealed fear. He was becoming something other, something that wasn't quite human anymore in the eyes of everyone around him. The discovery that Dr. Rebecca made changed everything. It happened 6 weeks after the first assassination attempt, during one of the routine genetic scans that had become part of Jake's daily life. She'd been analyzing a particularly complex section of his DNA when she noticed something strange, patterns that looked less like random genetic sequences and more like organized information. It's code, she'd explained to Jake and Emperor Nathan during an emergency meeting at the palace. Her crystalline form was vibrating with excitement. Actual information encoded directly into your DNA. The progenitors didn't just leave behind genetic templates for creating life, they left a message, hidden in sequences that would only be readable by someone with sufficiently pure progenitor markers. It had taken another week to fully decode the message, using specialized equipment and translation algorithms that had to be custom-built for the task. When they finally accessed the full content, what they found was both beautiful and terrifying. The progenitors had called it the convergence. According to the message, the seeding of life across the galaxy hadn't been random or purposeless. The progenitors had been conducting an experiment on a scale that was almost impossible to comprehend. They'd scattered their children across thousands of worlds, let them evolve in different environments, develop different cultures and technologies and ways of thinking. And they'd done it all as a test to see if those scattered children could eventually come back together, could overcome their differences and recognize each other as family. The convergence was the final step. When enough species had reached the stars, when enough civilizations had developed the technology and wisdom to communicate across the galaxy, when someone with pure enough progenitor DNA finally emerged to unlock the message, that's when the real gift would be revealed. And that gift was stored in Jake's genetic code, waiting to be activated and shared with every species that carried progenitor markers. Which, according to the message, was every intelligent species in the galaxy. The news went public 3 days later. Emperor Nathan had wanted to keep it secret, to figure out what it all meant before announcing it to the galaxy. But someone leaked the information, probably one of the scientists who'd helped with the decoding, and within hours it was the only thing anyone was talking about. The galaxy's reaction was immediate and divided. Some species embraced the revelation. The Corthan imperial government issued a statement calling it proof that all intelligent life was connected, that cooperation and unity should be the foundation of galactic civilization. Several religious groups declared it a fulfillment of ancient prophecies. Academic institutions across dozens of worlds celebrated it as the most important scientific discovery in recorded history. Others rejected it violently. The Separatist Alliance, representing species that believed in maintaining strict genetic and cultural purity, called it a lie designed to justify forced integration. Several governments with only low percentages of progenitor DNA saw it as an attempt to establish a hierarchy with humans at the top. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was an elaborate hoax designed to justify human domination of the galaxy. And then there were the fanatics. The ascendancy cult had existed for thousands of years, operating in the shadows, always searching for any trace of pure progenitor DNA. They believed that consuming the flesh of a true progenitor carrier would grant immortality and godlike powers. They'd been responsible for dozens of murders throughout history, killing anyone rumored to have high progenitor markers and conducting horrific rituals with the bodies. Now they knew exactly where to find the purest progenitor carrier in 3 million years. And they weren't about to let security or armies or the entire weight of the galactic community stop them from taking what they wanted. The attack came on a Tuesday morning during what should have been a normal day of classes. Jake was in advanced mathematics, actually enjoying himself for once as the professor worked through a complex problem involving multidimensional space. He'd made a few friends over the past weeks, other students brave enough or curious enough to look past the fear and see the person underneath. They'd been studying together the night before, and Jake had felt almost normal for the first time since the scanner had frozen on his DNA. Then the explosion started. The first blast hit the western side of campus, a massive detonation that shook the entire academy and sent debris flying hundreds of feet into the air. Alarms began wailing immediately, and through the windows, Jake could see smoke rising from multiple locations across the campus. "Lockdown procedures," the professor shouted, his tentacles flailing as he rushed to secure the classroom door. "Everyone stay calm and..." The wall exploded inward. Not from another bomb, this was different. The reinforced material that should have withstood anything short of military-grade weapons simply disintegrated, turning to dust and falling away. Through the hole stepped figures in black armor, carrying weapons that glowed with energy signatures Jake's enhanced senses immediately recognized as progenitor technology. Ancient, powerful, and designed specifically to capture or kill beings with high progenitor DNA. There, one of the attackers shouted, pointing directly at Jake. The primary target. Take him alive if possible, but take him. Jake's guards reacted instantly, opening fire on the attackers while forming a protective barrier around him. But more cultists were pouring through the hole in the wall, and Jake could see through the windows that they were coming from every direction. This wasn't a small strike team, this was an army. Chaos erupted across the campus. The Academy's security forces engaged the cultists in firefights that tore through buildings and scorched the carefully maintained lawns. Students and faculty ran for emergency shelters or fought back with whatever weapons they could find. The sky above filled with ships, both the cultists' assault craft and the Academy's defensive fighters scrambling to intercept them. Jake found himself being rushed through corridors by his guards, heading for a secure bunker deep beneath the administration building. But they didn't make it 20 feet before another group of cultists appeared ahead of them, cutting off their escape route. Fall back. Lieutenant Ryan shouted, his weapon tracking between multiple targets. Alternate route through the... He never finished the sentence. One of the cultists fired a weapon that released some kind of energy net, and it wrapped around 3 of Jake's guards instantly, crushing them with force that made their armor crumple like tin foil. Jake heard bones breaking, heard screams that cut off too quickly. More cultists were appearing from side corridors, from classrooms, from ventilation shafts. They'd infiltrated the entire campus, had probably been hiding in place for days or weeks, waiting for this moment. The attack was coordinated, overwhelming, designed to capture Jake before anyone could mount an effective defense. Lieutenant Ryan pushed Jake into a small office and slammed the door. Stay here. We'll hold them off until... No, Jake said, and his own voice surprised him with how calm it sounded. No more running. No more hiding. Something had shifted inside him. Maybe it was seeing his guards die protecting him. Maybe it was the sound of students screaming as the academy, the place that was supposed to be safe, supposed to be about learning and growth, turned into a war zone. Maybe it was the certainty that if he kept running, if he kept letting others fight his battles, people would keep dying. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was the progenitor DNA finally fully activating, responding to Jake's desperate need to protect the people around him, to stop this violence, to show the galaxy that he wasn't just a specimen to be studied or captured or killed. Jake walked back out into the corridor, past Lieutenant Ryan's protests, and faced the advancing cultists. You want me? He shouted, his voice carrying farther than it should have, amplified somehow by energy he was unconsciously projecting. Here I am. But I'm not going quietly, and I'm not letting you hurt anyone else. The cultists opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams, projectile weapons, even those nets that had crushed his guards. A dozen different attacks converged on Jake's position simultaneously, enough firepower to level a building. And Jake stopped all of it. His hands moved in ways he didn't consciously control, guided by instincts coded into his DNA from beings who'd reshaped galaxies. Energy barriers erupted from his palms, crystalline shields that deflected or absorbed every attack. He could feel the power flowing through him now, could sense the bioelectric field that all living things generated and realize he could manipulate it, shape it, use it. He pushed outward with his mind, and the cultists closest to him flew backward as if struck by an invisible wave. Their weapons sparked and died, the electronic components fried by electromagnetic pulses Jake generated without thinking. He could see the energy patterns in their bodies, could sense their intentions, their fear, their determination. More cultists kept coming, pouring into the corridor from every direction. But now Jake was moving among them, faster than humans should be able to move, his progenitor reflexes making every attack seem slow and clumsy. He disarmed them without seriously hurting them, crushed their weapons with hands that could suddenly generate enough force to crumple metal, created barriers of solid energy that trapped groups of attackers in place. It wasn't just physical ability. Jake found he could interface directly with the Academy's technology, could feel the computer systems that controlled doors and lights and security. With a thought, he locked down entire sections of campus, trapping cultists in corridors or rooms. He activated defensive systems that hadn't been used in decades, bringing online weapons and shields that most people had forgotten existed. He could sense where other students were hiding, could feel their terror through the energy patterns they generated. Jake directed security forces to their locations, coordinated the defense of the academy through a connection to its computer networks that operated faster than radio signals. And most importantly, he could feel the flow of energy through every living thing on campus. Every student, every faculty member, every security officer and cultist and innocent bystander. They were all connected through their progenitor DNA, all carrying fragments of the same ancient code, all part of the family the progenitors had created. Jake reached out with his mind, touching that connection, and suddenly he understood what the convergence really was. The gift wasn't power. It wasn't immortality or advanced technology or anything that could be taken by force. The gift was empathy, the ability to truly understand each other, to share experiences and memories and emotions directly between species, to feel what another being felt and see through their eyes. And it was stored in Jake's DNA, waiting to be activated and shared with everyone who carried progenitor markers. Which was everyone. Jake didn't make a conscious decision. He just opened himself up, let the message encoded in his genetic code broadcast outward through every available channel. The Academy's communication systems picked it up and amplified it. The ships fighting in orbit detected it and rebroadcast it. Within minutes, it was spreading across the entire planet, and from there to the rest of the galaxy. Every being with progenitor DNA, which was every intelligent species in known space, suddenly felt something new awakening in their minds. A connection, a bridge that let them perceive what others perceived. The cultists attacking the academy suddenly felt the fear of the students they were terrorizing, understood the pain they were causing, experienced the other side of their violence. The fighting stopped. Not because anyone ordered it to stop, but because it became impossible to continue. You couldn't hurt someone while simultaneously feeling their pain as if it were your own. You couldn't see another being as an enemy or an object when you could experience their thoughts and emotions directly. Jake collapsed to his knees, exhausted beyond anything he'd ever felt. Channeling that much power, broadcasting the convergence signal, interfacing with technology across an entire planet, it had pushed his body and mind far beyond their limits. He could feel consciousness slipping away, his vision going dark at the edges. But as he fell, dozens of hands caught him. Human hands, alien hands, cultists who moments before had been trying to capture him, guards who'd been protecting him, students who'd been hiding in fear. All of them working together now, supporting him, understanding finally what Jake had known from the beginning. They were family. All of them. Different forms, different cultures, different worlds, but connected by DNA that stretched back millions of years to the progenitors who'd hoped their scattered children would one day come home to each other. Emperor Nathan arrived with reinforcements an hour later to find the battle already over. The campus was a mess, buildings damaged, fires still burning in places, medical teams treating hundreds of wounded. But instead of continuing violence, he found something unprecedented. Former enemies were helping each other. Cultists were surrendering their weapons voluntarily and assisting with rescue efforts. Students from dozens of species were working side by side, coordinating through the new empathic connection that let them understand each other perfectly without words. Jake woke up 3 days later in the Academy's medical center, surrounded by flowers and gifts from people across the galaxy. His body had recovered, though Dr. Rebecca warned him that using that much power again too soon could be dangerous. The progenitor abilities were real, but they had limits, and Jake was still fundamentally human despite his exceptional DNA. Emperor Nathan visited personally, tears streaming down his scaled face. "You did it," the Emperor said quietly. "You gave us the gift the progenitors intended. Not power over each other, but understanding of each other. The ability to truly see through another's eyes." The galaxy was changing in ways nobody could fully predict. The convergence connection couldn't be turned off once activated. It was now a permanent part of how species with progenitor DNA interacted. Wars became almost impossible when you could feel your enemy's perspective. Prejudice became harder to maintain when you truly understood those you'd feared or hated. Cooperation became natural when you could share knowledge and experiences directly. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still species who rejected the change and tried to isolate themselves. But something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had taken a step toward unity that couldn't be walked back. Jake graduated from the Galactic Academy 2 years later with honors in engineering. He went on to become humanity's first ambassador to the Council of Convergence, the new galactic body formed to help species navigate the changes the empathic connection had created. He was still Jake Morrison from Nevada. Still liked terrible action movies and pizza with too much cheese. Still got nervous talking to attractive people and still worried about whether his hair looked okay. But he was also the human who'd reminded the galaxy that they were family. And that, in the end, made all the difference.